The Radio Man. I've debated for years whether or not I should even share this story, but it's haunted me since that summer, and writing it out feels like a strange kind of release. I'll try to keep it as coherent as possible because even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. It started innocently enough. I was in high school, and my friends and I spent most of our summer days biking and swimming in the local loch. You know, the kind of teenage freedom where the hours melt away, and you lose track of time just being outdoors. One day, my friend Jack mentioned a spot he'd found deep in the woods near the loch. He claimed he'd set up a rope swing there and that the rocks were perfect for jumping into the water. Sounded like an adventure, so we figured we'd check it out. We didn't plan it all that well, though, and by the time we made it to the loch, the sky was already beginning to turn that burnt orange of early evening. You know, that time when the shadows get long, and the woods start to feel different. But we pressed on, trekking deeper into the trees, following Jack's vague directions. It took way longer than we expected, and as the sun dipped lower, I started getting that uneasy feeling in my gut. The kind that tells you to turn back before something goes wrong. We were close to the water when I had to stop. I needed to take a leak, so I told Jack to go ahead, promising to catch up in a minute. He nodded and kept walking. I ducked into the trees, trying to be quick about it because the creeping darkness made the woods feel like they were closing in. And that's when I heard it, someone speaking. At first, I thought it was Jack, but the voice was deeper, raspier, like someone much older. It was close, too close. My stomach dropped. I scanned the trees, squinting in the fading light. Nobody. Was it an echo? I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it, but it wasn't a language I recognized. It was sharp, almost guttural, like a chant. I crept closer to the shore, feeling stupid but curious. And that's when I saw him. An old man, easily in his 70s or 80s, standing alone by the water. He wore this faded yellow rain jacket that looked like it hadn't seen a drop of rain in decades. His back was hunched, and his hands, shaking slightly, gripped an old, battered radio. It was one of those massive ones from the 80s, the kind with a broken antenna and crackling static. But it wasn't the sight of him that chilled me to the bone. He was talking to it. No, more than that, he was praising it. He lifted the radio over his head, like an offering to some unseen force, muttering that same gibberish under his breath. His voice grew louder, more frantic. I hid behind a tree, terrified that he'd see me, but also unable to tear my eyes away. The language, if it even was a language, made no sense. It didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before. I mean, I've picked up bits of a few languages over the years, but this was alien. It sounded like madness. He suddenly dropped to his knees, still holding the radio above him. His voice grew softer, but more desperate, pleading. That's when I realized, it wasn't just the radio. He was speaking to something. Something I couldn't see. Something I didn't want to see. My heart was pounding. I was ready to bolt when suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jumped and spun around, fists clenched. It was Jack. He gave me this weird look, clearly confused. "Dude, what the hell are you doing?" he whispered. I motioned for him to be quiet, but it was too late. The old man's head snapped around in our direction, his eyes wide and glassy, almost inhuman. He didn't speak. Didn't move. He just stared. Jack, oblivious to the sheer terror flooding through me, waved at the man. Hey there," he called out, his voice too loud, too friendly for the eerie silence around us. The old man didn't respond. He just slowly turned back toward the water, lifting the radio even higher now, his chanting growing louder. Jack laughed nervously, but I could see the unease creeping into his expression. "Let's get out of here," I muttered. Without waiting for a reply, I started backing away, never taking my eyes off the old man. Jack followed, and as soon as we were far enough from the clearing, we broke into a full sprint. We didn't stop running until we reached the road, breathless and drenched in sweat. Neither of us spoke on the ride back. The silence between us was thick with unspoken fear, like we both knew something was wrong but didn't dare say it. The next day, I tried to laugh it off, chalk it up to some creepy old guy living in the woods. Maybe he was just crazy, I told myself. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at play. His eyes, they weren't the eyes of a madman. They were too focused, too aware. And that language, that chanting, it echoed in my mind long after I closed my eyes. Weeks went by, and I tried to forget, but then Jack stopped showing up to school. He just vanished. No one knew where he went. His parents were frantic, but the police found nothing. No clues, no trace. It was like he'd been erased. I never went back to the lock after that. And I never told anyone what we saw. But sometimes, when I'm alone late at night, I swear I can hear static. That low, crackling hum, like an old radio trying to find a signal. And with it, that strange, guttural language, whispering from somewhere just beyond my understanding. I can't help but wonder if Jack found his way back to that spot. And if the radio man was still there, waiting.